The chamber was restless, but strangely quiet. Cameras hummed, lights glared against polished desks, and the air hung thick with unspoken tension. Everyone knew something was coming, but no one expected who would break the silence or how. Then, in one sharp, unflinching moment, Crockett leaned forward, her voice steady, her eyes locked. "Mr. Jordan, are you ready to explain this hidden deal?" The room froze. You could almost hear hearts stop. Reporters glanced up from their laptops, fingers poised above keys. Members shifted in their seats. Jordan blinked hard, the practiced confidence flickering from his face for just a second, just long enough for everyone to see it. And in that pause, in that crack of hesitation, the entire narrative shifted. This wasn't going to be business as usual. This wasn't another round of empty speeches and half-truths. This was about exposure, about the truth stepping onto the stage, uninvited, demanding to be heard. Crockett's words landed like a thunderclap, the kind of line that cuts through noise, that forces every camera to swivel, every microphone to strain, every pair of eyes to widen. Jordan tried to smirk, to shrug, to let arrogance serve as his armor. But the chamber wasn't buying it. Not tonight. The very mention of a hidden deal carried the weight of a nation's suspicion, an unspoken question millions had been asking for months. What exactly is he hiding? And now, here it was, flung into the light in the most public way possible. Gasps rippled across the room. A few nervous laughs tried to rise, but died quickly, swallowed by the gravity of the moment. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't blink. Her stillness was louder than any shout. The cameras zoomed in closer, as if trying to capture not just her face, but the power surging through her words. The crowd outside the chamber began to stir too. Screens lit up, live streams surged, hashtags sparked into existence. This wasn't a whisper anymore, it was a declaration, and it was unfolding live. Every viewer knew instinctively. History was being written in real time, and they had front-row seats. But this was only the opening volley. Because if the first words could silence a room, what came next would shake it to its very core. What followed next wasn't just politics, it was a live eruption that no one saw coming. For weeks the whispers had grown louder. Hallway conversations, late-night phone calls, unnamed sources hinting at something that didn't add up. In Washington, rumors are as common as coffee, but this one had a different weight to it. A hidden deal, shadowy, unspoken, but powerful enough to tilt decisions behind closed doors. People were tired of the smirks, the evasions, the way politicians like Jordan seemed to thrive in smoke-filled corners where the public wasn't invited. This moment mattered because the country was already raw. Families across America were juggling bills, fighting to hold on to hope, and watching their leaders trade dignity for headlines. Every promise of transparency rang hollow against the backdrop of backroom handshakes. And here was Jordan, the self-appointed crusader for oversight, posturing in front of cameras about accountability, while his own hands seemed anything but clean. That's why Crockett's words cut so deep. They weren't just a question. They were a mirror held up to a system that too many people had stopped believing in. Viewers watching from living rooms, phones, and crowded diners felt the sting because they'd lived it. They'd been told to trust leaders who later betrayed that trust, to believe in rules that only seemed to apply to the powerless. And in that chamber, Crockett became the voice of every American who had ever asked, why do they get away with it? Why is there one set of rules for us and none for them? Her interruption didn't just pierce Jordan's composure, it pierced the illusion that business could go on as usual. The stage itself added fuel to the fire. Ongoing investigations hovered like storm clouds. Staffers whispered of favors exchanged, of allies shielded from scrutiny. The pieces of the puzzle had been floating for months, but no one had dared to place them together in public. Until now. Crockett wasn't hinting. She was naming. She was dragging the shadows into the light. Every pause in her voice dared Jordan to respond. Every silence stretched longer than the last, making millions lean closer to their screens. Was this the night the carefully stacked tower of excuses came tumbling down? Was this the moment arrogance finally met its match? Americans are weary of corruption because corruption isn't abstract. It bleeds into daily life. It's the medicine too expensive to buy because lobbyists write the rules. It's the factory closed because deals are struck in back rooms. It's the hypocrisy of men like Jordan thundering about morality while cutting corners when no one is supposed to notice. That's why the confrontation mattered. It wasn't just one politician calling another out. It was a showdown between the arrogance of secrecy and the dignity of truth. And make no mistake, people could feel it. The chamber wasn't just an echo chamber anymore. It was a stage where the stakes had real weight, and every word carried the possibility of unraveling more than one man's reputation. Crockett's voice, steady and unshaken, told the country this wasn't theater for its own sake. This was exposure. This was accountability finally catching up with those who thought they were untouchable. And in living rooms, in group chats, across social media feeds, a collective thought crystallized. If this deal comes to light, everything could change. Because tonight, the truth wasn't going to stay buried. Tonight, the shadows were shrinking, and the nation could feel it. But Crockett wasn't done. She had the receipts. To understand why Crockett's words hit like a thunderbolt, you have to understand Jim Jordan himself, the man who has built an entire career on swagger, bluster, and the illusion of untouchable authority. For years, Jordan has positioned himself as a relentless interrogator, the loudest voice in the room, the self-proclaimed watchdog of government waste and corruption. He doesn't just argue, he performs, weaving himself into the narrative as if sheer volume equals credibility. But behind the bravado lies a pattern, one as familiar as it is calculated. Jordan is quick to demand answers, yet slow, painfully slow when questions land at his own doorstep. He champions transparency, but his dealings are anything but transparent. The same man who pounds the table for accountability somehow always sidesteps it when the light begins to turn his way. Ask those who've worked alongside him, and the whispers grow louder. Alliances forged in secrecy, favors exchanged quietly, networks built not on integrity, but on protection. Jordan has survived scandals not because he cleared his name, but because powerful allies were willing to shield him, to blur the lines until the public lost track of the truth. That's his playbook: confuse, deflect, outshout the critics until fatigue sets in, and it's worked. For years, he has strutted through hearings with the smirk of a man who knows no one will ever truly hold him accountable. Every dodge, every half-answer, every sneer has reinforced the narrative he wants the world to believe: that he is untouchable, beyond reproach, immune to the consequences that ordinary citizens face every day. Yet the contradictions glare like neon signs. He rails against elites while dining with them. He preaches integrity while surrounding himself with controversy. He waves the banner of truth while hiding behind procedural smokescreens and partisan shields. The hypocrisy is almost theatrical, and Jordan, ever the showman, plays the role with ease. This is the man Crockett called out, a figure who had built his identity on the stage of confrontation, suddenly confronted in a way he never anticipated. For the first time, the performance wasn't his to control, and that loss of control, so slight, so fleeting, was enough to reveal what had always been there beneath the bluster. Insecurity, fear of exposure, the gnawing knowledge that the truth can't be shouted down forever. The arrogance is not just personal, it's systemic. Jordan represents a class of politician that believes rules are tools, not boundaries. That accountability is for the other side, never for them. He thrives in a system where power protects itself, where loyalty is rewarded more than honesty, and where the loudest voice drowns out the most truthful one. But arrogance is fragile. It feeds on repetition, on control, on the illusion that nothing can pierce it. And arrogance hates questions it cannot answer. That's why the words "hidden deal" landed like a blade. They cut past the performance and went straight to the hollow center of the act. Viewers who had watched Jordan sneer his way through countless hearings suddenly saw something different. A man cornered, stripped of the easy swagger, unable to laugh it off. That image alone began to fracture the narrative he had spent years constructing. Because once the mask slips, It's hard to convince the world it was never a mask at all. The contrast with Crockett could not be sharper. Where Jordan leaned on volume, she wielded calm precision. Where he thrived on deflection, she thrived on clarity. He was the caricature of arrogance, and she was the embodiment of dignity. Together they set the stage for a collision that felt less like politics and more like a morality play, unfolding live. And in that moment, America wasn't just watching a politician sweat. They were watching a symbol of unchecked power finally meet resistance. They were watching the possibility of justice pierce through arrogance, of truth finally refusing to stay silent. Because arrogance can shout, it can mock, it can posture. But what happens when arrogance meets someone who isn't afraid to pull back the curtain? Before Crockett ever stepped onto the national stage, before her name became a trending hashtag, she was a fighter, though not in the way the world typically defines one. Her story is not of privilege or shortcuts. It is the story of a woman who understood from an early age that dignity is not handed to you. It is carved from the stone of struggle. Born into a community where resources were scarce but resilience was abundant, Crockett learned early what it meant to stand tall when the world expected you to bow. She was raised in a household where every dollar mattered, where perseverance wasn't a slogan but a necessity. Her parents instilled in her a truth that became her guiding light. If you see injustice, you don't turn away. You confront it, even when your voice shakes. Especially when your voice shakes. School was never just about textbooks for her. It was about finding ways to thrive in a system that often looked past children like her. She worked harder, studied longer, refused to let circumstance dictate destiny. She excelled not because doors were opened for her, but because she was willing to push until those doors gave way. And when she chose public service as her path, it wasn't because it was glamorous. It was because she knew the people who raised her, the neighbors she grew up with, deserved someone in power who remembered their names, their faces, their struggles. Crockett carried those lessons with her into every courtroom, every meeting, every debate. She earned respect not by shouting the loudest, but by listening when others refused to. She built her reputation on a calm strength, the kind of presence that unsettles opponents more than any insult could. For her, leadership was not about posturing. It was about service, about making sure voices drowned out for too long could finally be heard. And make no mistake, there were plenty who tried to silence her. Intimidation came in many forms: patronizing smirks, whispered threats, the quiet machinery of a system designed to wear down those who dared to challenge it. Yet Crockett never flinched. She had seen intimidation before, in countless forms, and each time it only deepened her resolve. Every attempt to belittle her reminded her why she had chosen this path in the first place. Because justice does not defend itself, and dignity must be defended at all costs. Her journey wasn't just personal, it was deeply political in the most human sense. She saw firsthand how backroom deals weren't abstract concepts but real-life betrayals. She saw communities promised opportunity, only to watch those promises vanish once the cameras left. She saw how arrogance at the top meant hardship at the bottom, and she vowed she would not be another silent bystander to that cycle. Crockett's rise wasn't meteoric. It was steady, deliberate, earned one battle at a time. She wasn't carried into power by inherited privilege or dynastic ties. She built her foundation the hard way through long nights, relentless preparation, and an unshakable belief that truth was worth fighting for. And with every victory, however small, she became harder to ignore. When she entered Congress, many underestimated her. Some dismissed her as too soft-spoken, too unassuming, not cut out for the brutal theater of political combat. But those who underestimated her missed the lesson she had learned long ago. Real power is not in the volume of your voice, but in the weight of your words. She didn't need to drown out opponents. She needed only to speak with clarity and conviction. That clarity became her weapon, and her calm became her shield. So when she leaned forward in that chamber, when she asked Jim Jordan if he was ready to explain his hidden deal, it wasn't a spur-of-the-moment jab. It was the culmination of a lifetime of preparation. It was the product of every insult she had endured, every door she had pried open, every fight she had waged for those whose voices had been silenced. She wasn't just speaking for herself. She was carrying entire communities with her, immigrants seeking dignity, workers demanding fairness, citizens desperate for honesty. Her calmness in that explosive moment wasn't detachment. It was mastery. She knew exactly what she was doing. Every pause was intentional. Every word was sharpened by years of experience facing down systems that told her to sit quietly. In that chamber, she stood not as an individual, but as a testament to resilience itself, and the audience felt it. People watching could see themselves in her. The daughter who had worked twice as hard for half the recognition, the worker who had been dismissed despite their competence, the immigrant who had carried generations of sacrifice on their shoulders. Crockett's voice was their voice, her courage their courage. Her life had taught her that the fight for dignity is never easy, but it is always necessary. That truth became her armor, and on that night it became her sharpest weapon. And that history of struggle is exactly why she was prepared for this showdown. The chamber, already tense, now vibrated with unease. Crockett's challenge hung in the air like smoke after a spark, and Jordan was scrambling to smother it. His voice, usually booming with overconfidence, rose too quickly, too loudly. "That's not true. That's a mischaracterization." He tried to wave her off, his hands cutting the air as if sheer movement could erase the weight of her words. But Crockett did not flinch. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't let anger dictate her tone. Instead, she leaned into her calm, knowing it was her sharpest contrast against his unraveling. "So then," she replied smoothly, "are you saying the documents aren't real, or just that you don't want them read into the record?" The words landed with surgical precision, tightening the noose of accountability one measured sentence at a time. Jordan tried again, this time interrupting, his voice rising over hers. "This is a distraction. This is political theater." He glanced around the room, searching for allies, for nods of reassurance. But the chamber wasn't with him. Even those inclined to defend him could feel the ground shifting. His usual tricks, deflection, outrage, manufactured indignation, were colliding with something stronger: Crockett's composure. The murmurs began then, small at first, rolling like distant thunder. Reporters shuffled in their seats, their pens flying faster across notepads. Staffers exchanged nervous looks. The crowd outside, glued to their screens, lit up timelines with disbelief and anticipation. It wasn't just another shouting match. This was a reversal of roles. Jordan, the man who thrived on rattling opponents, was himself being rattled. Crockett pressed on, her tone still measured, her words sharper with every exchange. "You've built your career demanding transparency from others," she said, her gaze unwavering. "So why does that standard suddenly stop at your own doorstep?" Each phrase struck like a drumbeat, steady and inescapable. Jordan's face reddened, his jaw tightened, but no answer came that could silence the truth ringing from her question. He interrupted again, talking faster, louder, tripping over his own rhetoric. "You're twisting facts. This is nonsense. Look, everyone knows." The sentences bled into one another, incoherent under pressure. Crockett let him sputter, then cut through the noise with a single line. "If it's nonsense, then why are you so afraid of it?" That landed. The murmurs grew louder, a ripple spreading through the chamber. Cameras zoomed in. You could almost hear the collective intake of breath as Jordan's defenses faltered. His volume no longer commanded the room, it exposed his desperation. Still, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't need to. Her restraint was its own kind of power, a demonstration that strength isn't always in the shout, but in the silence that follows. Every time Jordan lunged, she sidestepped, responding with precision rather than passion. And in doing so, she made his arrogance look clumsy, his evasions obvious. Viewers watching felt the shift. This wasn't just a political sparring match. It was a live portrait of dignity confronting bluster, of composure dismantling chaos. Crockett's calm wasn't passive, it was devastating. And Jordan, for the first time in memory, was the one left grasping for footing. The chamber seemed to shrink around them, the clash pulling every gaze, every ear. It was no longer about a hidden deal alone. It was about exposing a man who had built an empire of intimidation, suddenly stripped of his armor. The tension grew with each volley, every question sharpening into a blade, every denial sounding hollower than the last. And as the air thickened with anticipation, one truth became undeniable. This was building toward something bigger, something unforgettable. The room, the country, the watching world, everyone could sense it. But Crockett was just warming up. The mic drop moment was coming. The tension had reached its breaking point. Jordan's interruptions had piled up, his protests rising in volume but shrinking in impact. The audience, both in the chamber and across the country, was leaning forward, waiting for what came next. And then, with a calm that cut through the noise, Crockett reached for the stack of papers at her side. She didn't rush. She didn't dramatize the gesture. She simply placed them on the table, adjusted the microphone, and began. "Let's take this one step at a time," she said. Her tone was even, deliberate, every syllable dripping with quiet authority. "Because the American people deserve the truth." The chamber shifted. Pens stopped scratching. Phones lowered mid-scroll. Jordan leaned back in his chair, his smirk faltering as his eyes darted to the documents. And then came the first blow. On March 14th, Crockett read, "Emails show your office was directly involved in coordinating conversations about—" She paused. The pause was everything, long enough for the words to sink in, long enough for anticipation to grow unbearable. About shielding key allies from oversight. The silence was deafening. Jordan attempted a scoff, his lips curling, but the stillness of the room betrayed him. He stammered, That's not the full story." Crockett raised her eyes, piercing, unshaken. "It's your words, Congressman, not mine." A gasp rippled through the chamber. Viewers at home clipped the moment instantly, sending it racing across social media. Within seconds, hashtags began to trend. Jordan exposed. Crockett delivers. Screens lit up, timelines flooded with disbelief and exhilaration. The eruption was only just beginning. Crockett turned the page. On April 2nd, a memo circulated again. From your office detailing how to delay, deny, and deflect inquiries into these arrangements. She lifted her eyes again, letting the words breathe, letting the crowd feel the weight. Delay, deny, and deflect. That's the strategy. Isn't that exactly what you're doing right now? The crowd murmured louder this time. Even members accustomed to partisan loyalty struggled to mask their reactions. A few heads dropped, others turned away. Jordan's posture grew stiff, his jaw clenched tight, the red spreading up his neck. He tried to fire back. "That's a distortion those memos don't say," but Crockett didn't let him finish. She leaned in slightly, her voice dropping just enough to force the room to lean closer. "Do you deny this document came from your staff? Do you deny your office circulated these instructions?" Jordan sputtered, words colliding in his throat. Well, that's not the point." And that was when it happened. The moment that sealed it. Crockett lifted the final sheet, her hand steady, her eyes unwavering. "And here, Congressman, is the signature. Your signature. On an agreement that contradicts everything you've told the public." The chamber fell silent. Not a cough, not a shuffle. Just silence. Jordan's eyes darted, searching for an escape, for a rescue that wasn't coming. His mouth opened, but nothing coherent emerged. And then, like a lightning strike, the silence broke. Gasps exploded into shouts, laughter, disbelief, cheers. The chamber erupted. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene, their fingers flying. Social media detonated clips, memes, headlines flooding the digital landscape. She brought the receipts. One post screamed, shared thousands of times in minutes. Crockett receipts joined the trending ranks. Voices across the spectrum amplifying the moment. The hero had struck, and the villain's mask was slipping for all to see. Jordan's hands fumbled with his notes. His voice cracked as he tried to regroup. This is political. This is a smear." But the words fell flat. The louder he shouted, the smaller he seemed. Each denial only confirmed the truth. He had been caught, cornered, exposed. Crockett, meanwhile, didn't shout. She didn't gloat. She simply leaned back, folded the papers neatly, and said, "The people can decide for themselves." It was understated, but devastating. A mic drop without ever touching the microphone. The crowd knew it. The eruption outside the chamber mirrored the one inside. Commentators raced to go live, their voices tinged with disbelief. "We've never seen Jordan so rattled," one declared. Another noted, "This could change the trajectory of his career." Ordinary citizens, long cynical about political theater, found themselves replaying the moment, sharing it with captions like, "Finally, someone stood up to him." Even allies who once stood shoulder to shoulder with Jordan were uncomfortably silent, their avoidance louder than any defense. The carefully constructed fortress of arrogance had crumbled, not with a bang, but with the undeniable weight of evidence placed calmly on the record. And the beauty of it was in Crockett's restraint. She didn't have to twist the knife. The documents spoke for themselves. Her poise was the contrast that made his collapse all the more visible. She had turned the chamber into a courtroom, the audience into a jury, and the verdict was clear. As the eruption simmered into whispers, every camera lens seemed to fix on Jordan's face, capturing the rare sight of a man unmasked in real time. His usual smirk was gone, replaced with the hollow stare of someone who had just realized the performance was over. And beyond the chamber walls, the ripple effects were already unfolding. Late-night hosts prepped their monologues, activists clipped the footage for rallies, and ordinary Americans felt a jolt of validation that even the loudest, most arrogant voices could be humbled by truth. The chamber, still buzzing, carried the weight of history. It wasn't just another exchange. It was a turning point, a demonstration of what happens when arrogance meets accountability, when power built on bluster crumbles under the gravity of evidence. Crockett had delivered the mic drop. The crowd had erupted. The world was watching, but the real shock came after the cameras stopped rolling. The chamber may have returned to order, but outside its walls, chaos ignited in the best possible way. Within seconds, the clip of Crockett's takedown shot across the internet like wildfire. Phones buzzed, feeds refreshed endlessly, and hashtags trended with dizzying speed. Crockett receipts, Jordan exposed, mic drop moment. Millions of people who hadn't watched a hearing in years suddenly stopped what they were doing to replay those words, to witness the eruption, to feel the vindication they'd been waiting for. Memes sprouted instantly. Screenshots of Jordan's reddened face were paired with captions like, "When you get caught and the Wi-Fi still works." TikToks layered Crockett's calm voice over cinematic soundtracks, transforming the moment into instant folklore. Twitter threads dissected every pause, every line, every devastating piece of evidence. For once, politics wasn't just background noise, it was electrifying drama that made people feel awake, alive, part of something bigger. Commentators on cable news scrambled to get in front of cameras. This was unprecedented, one declared. Jordan, the aggressor, suddenly on defense and utterly unprepared. Another anchor leaned forward, voice heavy with awe. Crockett didn't just call him out, she dismantled him with precision. This is the kind of exchange that rewrites reputations. But it wasn't just the pundits. Celebrities weighed in, lending their megaphones to amplify the shockwaves. An Oscar-winning actress tweeted, "Crockett just did what we've all been waiting for. Calm, poised, unstoppable." A major recording artist posted an Instagram story with the clip, overlaid with the caption, "This is how you speak truth to power." The cultural echo chamber, so often fragmented, united for a moment under the clarity of Crockett's mic drop. Politicians, too, couldn't ignore it. Some issued cautious statements, attempting to downplay the moment, but their very hesitation revealed its impact. Others, especially progressives, seized the chance to rally their base. "This is why we fight," one tweeted. "Truth, dignity, accountability. Crockett showed us the way." Even international figures chimed in. Parliamentarians overseas applauded the courage. Commentators abroad marveled at the spectacle of American democracy catching fire in real time. Meanwhile, ordinary people, teachers, nurses, truck drivers, students felt a surge of validation. For years, they had watched hearings dissolve into noise, scandals brushed aside, arrogance rewarded. But now, for once, they saw accountability play out in the open. Group chats lit up with friends sending the clip back and forth. "Did you see this? Finally!" Families around dinner tables replayed the exchange. The youngest children asking why the man looked so nervous. Parents answering, "Because the truth caught him." This was more than entertainment. It was empowerment. People who had grown cynical about politics felt a flicker of belief again that maybe, just maybe, someone could stand in that chamber and speak for them. Crockett became more than a representative. She became a vessel for the collective frustration, dignity, and resilience of millions. The shockwaves reached places Jordan could never have imagined. Late-night hosts built entire monologues around his unraveling. Comedy sketches exaggerated his stammering, his reddened face, the way Crockett's calm silences cut deeper than any shout. In living rooms, the audience roared with laughter, but underneath the humor was relief. Relief that arrogance had been punctured, that the truth had slipped past the smoke screens. Even those who had never heard of Crockett before that night now knew her name. She wasn't just trending. She was defining the conversation. Social media feeds filled with messages of gratitude. She stood up for us. This is what leadership looks like. Finally, dignity in the face of corruption. And while Jordan's allies tried to spin, their defenses sounded hollow. Clips of their talking points were instantly countered with the footage itself. Facts, receipts, the undeniable mic drop moment, it all drowned out attempts at damage control. The fortress of spin had collapsed before it could even be built. But the aftermath wasn't just digital. In communities across the nation, the confrontation sparked conversations about accountability, justice, and dignity. High school students debated it in classrooms. Activists referenced it at rallies. Faith leaders wove it into sermons about truth and courage. The moment had transcended politics, it had become a cultural touchstone. The shockwaves were everywhere. And yet, as the celebration reached a fever pitch, as the memes and hashtags cemented Crockett's triumph, something deeper lingered beneath the surface. The eruption had exposed more than just one man's arrogance. It had illuminated the fragility of a system that too often rewards silence, excuses corruption, and shields the powerful from scrutiny. Yes, Crockett had won the night. But the story wasn't finished, because beneath the applause, a deeper truth waited to be reckoned with. Yet beneath the celebration, a deeper truth emerged. When the noise of the chamber quieted and the hashtags began to settle into digital history, what lingered was not just the memory of a political clash. What remained was a reminder, a living, breathing lesson about who we are supposed to be as a people, and what we demand from those who lead us. Crockett understood this. She didn't bask in the takedown, didn't linger on Jordan's unraveling. Instead, she shifted the focus outward, away from personal triumph, toward something larger, something universal. Her words became less about him and more about us. Dignity, she said, is not optional. It is the baseline. Arrogance may roar, but it cannot endure. Service is not self-interest dressed in rhetoric. It is sacrifice. It is accountability. It is truth lived out loud. These weren't just lines for the record. They were a creed, a manifesto carved out of years of broken promises and backroom betrayals. And the resonance was undeniable, because Americans know the sting of arrogance. They know the weariness of watching leaders put self before service, corruption before country. And in Crockett's calm but unshakable declaration, they saw the antidote. She embodied a principle many feared had vanished: that truth can still matter, that accountability is not a relic, that dignity is not weakness, but strength. It was more than politics, it was deeply human. Parents teaching children about integrity could point to her example. Workers clocking long shifts could see in her poise the reminder that their labor, their voices, their struggles were worthy of respect. Immigrants who had carried stories of sacrifice across oceans and borders saw their own journey reflected in her refusal to bow to arrogance. And in that moment, Crockett reframed the story of the night. It wasn't about Jordan's hidden deal anymore. It wasn't even about her standing in that chamber. It was about the collective lesson, that the American spirit is strongest when truth stands taller than lies, when dignity outlasts mockery, when accountability breaks through corruption's walls. The crescendo built not in shouts, but in echoes of her words rippling outward. Commentators stopped arguing about winners and losers and started reflecting on values. Faith leaders quoted her in Sunday services. Teachers replayed the clip in civics classes. Community organizers folded her words into chants and speeches. It was as if, for one rare moment, the country remembered itself. And that was the real victory. Not just that Jordan was exposed, not just that Crockett delivered a mic drop, but that millions walked away with a renewed sense of what it means to be American. It was a reclamation of ideals too often treated as platitudes: justice, dignity, service, and a reminder that they only live when we demand them, fiercely and unapologetically. For Crockett, it was never about personal glory. It was about holding up a mirror to the nation and saying, "This is who we are supposed to be. This is what we must never forget." Her victory was not in silencing arrogance, but in amplifying dignity, in proving that calm resolve can shake the foundations of corruption. And as people replayed the moment, shared it with family, debated it with friends, they weren't just reliving a clash, they were carrying a lesson forward. A lesson that truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. A lesson that arrogance, once exposed, cannot be unseen. A lesson that dignity, once defended, cannot be erased. The night would pass, the feeds would refresh, the next headline would come, but the moral clarity of that moment would endure. Crockett had reminded the country that our story is not written by arrogance, but by resilience, not by corruption, but by accountability, not by fear, but by dignity. And that's why this moment will be remembered. Long after the noise fades, Crockett's voice still echoes in the minds of everyone who witnessed it, the night she exposed Jim Jordan's hidden deal, the night the chamber erupted, the night dignity stood taller than arrogance. It wasn't just a clash, it was a turning point, a reminder that truth doesn't whisper in corners, it demands the stage. That's what this story was always about. Not the bluster of one man trying to drown out accountability, but the calm strength of a leader who refused to bend. Crockett showed us that service means sacrifice, that power without integrity is nothing, and that when arrogance is confronted with truth, it shatters under its own weight. And now, the question isn't what happened in that chamber. We know what happened. The real question is, what will we do with it? Will we let it be just another viral clip? Or will we carry the lesson forward into conversations, into communities, into the choices we make about the kind of country we want to live in? Because if this moment proved anything, it's that dignity belongs not to the powerful few, but to all of us. It's in the way we demand better, the way we refuse to stay silent, the way we choose truth over convenience. So if dignity means more than arrogance to you, if you believe service should always outweigh self-interest, then this is your movement too. Hit subscribe. Share this story. Add your voice to the millions who know that accountability is not negotiable. Together, we don't just watch history, we write it. And tonight, with Crockett's courage as our guide, we begin the next chapter.